June 17th, 1937, Mesa Verde, Colorado. The morning sun had not yet climbed above the rim. The world inside the alcove was a hush of shadow and dust. Dr. Eliza Hartman, trenchcoat cinched against a wind that smelled of baked sandstone and old lightning, crouched with her left knee in the gritty abrasion of a ledge. Her gloved hands were clasped around a wooden-handled trowel, soft steel head nicked from a winter's frost, and a leather notebook lay open on her thigh, pages pressed against the breeze with a small river rock. Beside her, Private Samuel, Sam Choate, no longer in uniform but still carrying the compact, surveyed posture of someone who'd once called himself sergeant, brushed sand away from a black shard of pottery with the patient cadence of a man removing scabbed earth. The small team around them breathed in sync, a chorus of sips from canteens, the rasp of canvas, low murmurs over maps. The alcove itself was a cathedral of stone, a natural overhang 15 meters above the arroyo, its ceiling mottled charcoal and ochre, spider-webbed with root stains. Inside, an ancestral puebloan complex clung to the bedrock like a barnacle to a cliff. Stone rooms stacked and staggered, kivas sunk like upturned bowls into shadow. The air tasted faintly of iron. Beneath it, something else, slower, older, simmered. The team had come expecting pottery, roof beams, the usual strata of occupation. No one had come to expect water where none should be. Dr. Hartman wiped her hand across her forehead and looked up toward the cliff face. The first light painted the outer rim in a brutal gold. In the inner sanctum, the team's lanterns threw pools of amber. Behind her, Miguel Ortega, a graduate student with a pencil tucked like a reed behind his ear, snapped a photograph with the heavy box camera they'd lugged up the meseta. The shutter clicked with a sound like a distant metronome. He leaned in, whispering measurements, 2.6 meters north of the pithouse wall, and Dr. Hartman marked the line with a greased pencil, fingers still smelling of tobacco from last night's campfire. They had been excavating for 3 weeks. The Bureau had granted permission only after a long sequence of letters and petition, and the land superintendent's warnings about lightning and falling stone had been a constant background hum. The earlier season's survey had shown only what everyone assumed: defensive refuge. The arc of mainstream thinking, published in museum journals and repeated in lecture halls, was tidy and violent. Cliff dwellings were safe rooms, bastions raised to keep enemies at bay. The cliff's elevation, the maze-like doorways and low windows, the kiva designs, all read, in the shorthand of the day, like fortification. But on this morning, as the crew scraped at a ledge near the easternmost room, a ring of pale bedrock came away in a thin, flat plane. Sam's crowbar rang. A sliver of sandstone gave back like a sigh. Under the stone, the faint line of something man-cut showed, an incised channel so shallow it could be missed in a hurried survey. Dr. Hartman bent close, breath held. The channel caught the light and turned it into a thin river of shadow. An engineered groove running along the bedrock, graduating with a slope so careful it read like a map-maker's handwriting. "Huh," Miguel said. The word was small, but the air around it charged. He knelt and traced the channel with a gloved finger, feeling the faint hollowness where the rock had been chipped away. Around them, the crew, 2 laborers with broad-brimmed hats, a stonemason named John Ralston who smelled of lime and sweat, shifted into motion. Tools were set aside for delicate implements: brushes, a wooden pick, a sponge. Dr. Hartman's voice, usually precise and clipped, softened. She said slow, "She document everything." Her hand hovered over the channel, hesitant, as if touching the skin of a living thing. Farther in, beyond the room's threshold, The alcove's shadow sheltered a network of stones packed tight like the ribs of a boat. A half-buried stone basin, almost circular, reflected the lantern light like a dull coin. Dr. Hartman crouched and ran a fingertip along its rim. Sand brushed away, revealing a small incision, a spout, leading toward that shallow groove. The team fell silent, the kind of silence that's both professional and superstitious, as if sound might scare away knowledge. "Could be ritual," John offered. The word tasted like a placard in a museum gallery. Safe, explanatory, tidy. But Dr. Hartman shook her head, the notebook pressed to her chest. "This is hydraulic work. See the slope? It's measured." She tapped a rule against her palm, the wooden edge a metronome against the stone. "They cut these channels to move water." The statement hung, improbable and immediate. The cliff's dry throat seemed to breathe in. Outside, wind dug at the cliff's corner, sending a shower of granular stone to the ledge where a ceramic bowl was waiting to be cataloged. The light shifted. The day warmed. A raven flew in a slow orbit above the park, calling like the punctuation in a sentence no one yet understood. Dr. Hartman straightened, the weight of the find settling onto her shoulders. The prevailing story, defense, retreat, siege, thinned in her mind like mist. She glanced to the south where the canyon narrowed and a seasonal runoff gully fed the valley below. She thought of the people who'd lived here generations earlier, of children's feet on packed earth, of mothers stirring stew in clay pots, of elders mapping weather by the whisper of clouds. For a moment she let the imagination walk where the evidence was only beginning to point. Then she turned back to the channel, to the basin, to the patient geometry of lines carved into stone that had waited, for how long, for someone to look closely enough. Sam hooked his hand into his belt, the old sergeant's blink settling across his face. "If they built a water system into the bedrock up here," he said quietly, "they weren't hiding, they were staying." The wind answered like a page turning. Dr. Hartman opened her notebook and began to write. Not yet conclusions, only careful, measured observations. She underlined the word channel twice, then basin, then gradient. Her hand trembled with the small pleasure of discovery, the same quick electricity that had led her to archaeology in the first place. Around her the team leaned in, their breaths, their tools, their thoughts, all converging on a sloping line in the rock that suddenly refused to be only evidence of war. The following day began before sunrise. Lanterns sputtered to life against the still dark vault of the alcove, their glow casting orange halos on the rock as if the walls themselves were remembering firelight. No one spoke at first. The weight of yesterday's discovery, the channel, the basin, the simple but undeniable suggestion of intention hung over the dig like smoke. For years, the cliff dwellings had been cast in the public mind as fortresses, last stands of a desperate people. But as the first trowels struck stone this morning, every scrape carried a different question. Dr. Hartman knelt beside the eastern wall, copper hair tied in a knot beneath her felt hat. She handed Miguel the survey rod and instructed him to measure the slope of the incised groove once more. He pressed the tool flush to the bedrock and squinted through the leveling vial as if staring down a rifle sight. 3 degrees, he said. He checked again. Consistent to the centimeter. Gravity fed. That's not accidental. Private, no, former private, Sam Choate was already at work clearing the debris downstream of the channel. He'd switched from pick and shovel to his pocket knife, flicking away pebbles with surgical precision. His movements were so careful, they seemed reverent. Every so often he paused, brushing sweat-darkened hair from his brow with the back of his wrist. He no longer grumbled about paperwork, the climb, or the superintendent's rules. Something in the stone had silenced the soldier in him and stirred the engineer.
They widened the exposed path of the carved groove across nearly 8 meters of bedrock before breakfast. It curved, not straight as a gutter, but gently banked, following the natural slant of the ledge, as though negotiating terrain like a river would. At one point, it vanished beneath a flat stone slab, meticulously placed. It was Miguel who spotted the edge of the capstone. He tapped it with his brush handle. The sound came back hollow. John Ralston, the stonemason, set his hands against the slab and pushed. The stone didn't budge. Sam joined him, hands braced, boots grinding grit, muscles strained. The slab quivered like a tooth resisting the pliers of a dentist, then lifted with a sigh of dust. Beneath it lay a hollow, rectangular, perfectly cut, its interior sealed smooth as river-sanded limestone. A cistern, human-made, hidden like treasure. Eliza leaned over it, heart drumming so hard she felt the pulse against her collarbones. The void exhaled cool air. She dipped a finger in and brushed the bottom. Smooth, purposeful, waterproofed? She reached for her notebook and scribbled fiercely. Subterranean retention chamber, plaster, test samples, intentional cover. Defensive structures don't bother with hidden reservoirs, Sam said. He was no longer whispering. You don't hide your drinking water inside your walls unless you live here. The words echoed in the cavernous silence. From the alcove mouth, the sun crept in like a golden tide, painting the cistern walls in amber. Eliza watched the light catch on faint traces of pigment along the rim. Red ochre, maybe. A mark of ownership, a blessing, something ancient and domestic. She imagined a woman bending over this same cistern 1,000 years ago, cupping water to her lips. They worked until their fingers numbed, careful not to disturb more than they must. By midday, Miguel's sketchbook was full of channel maps, and John had traced the plaster with a mason's wonder, murmuring admiration for whoever carved it. But the water system was not a single feature. As they cleared debris farther upslope, more channels emerged, some twin-tracked like cattle paths, others branching like capillaries. One led upward to an overhang catchment carved into the cliff face itself, a shallow basin poised beneath a natural drip line where seasonal rains would strike and funnel inward. Eliza stood beneath it and closed her eyes. She could almost hear the rain, pattering on rock, trickling down the grooves, pooling, rushing downhill toward the cistern. A self-feeding artery, a system invisible unless you pressed your palms against the stone and listened. Everyone kept saying refuge, but this is infrastructure. Miguel looked up from his sketches. What does that make this place? Eliza exhaled slowly, the word forming before she gave herself permission to say it. A home. Behind them, the wind shifted across the canyon, carrying the dry smell of sage and lightning. It curled around the cistern, like a blessing or a warning. Because if this place had been designed to keep life in rather than keep enemies out, then everything they thought they knew about the people who once lived in the cliffs was about to unravel. July 2nd, 1937. The heat had sunk into the canyon like molten glass, shimmering over scrub and yucca. By mid-afternoon, cicadas buzzed like crackling wires in the cottonwoods below. The team had retreated beneath the alcove's shadow, hands blistered and shoulders painted in dust, when the sky shifted. It began with the sound, not thunder, not yet, more like the slow roll of drumheads across the horizon. Sam was the first to stop moving. He tilted his head upward, eyes narrowing. A moment later, a breeze cut through the alcove, cool, sudden, electric with petrichor, the smell of rain before it falls. "Cover the catalogs," Eliza barked, snapping out of her stupor. Miguel scrambled for the crates of tagged pottery and field notes, sliding them beneath a canvas tarp. John shoved chisels and brushes into leather satchels, muttering something about timing like a preacher. The light dimmed. Shadows fled the canyon floor. The first drop hit the ledge near the channel,
sharp as a pebble. Then came the torrent. Thunder cracked directly overhead, echoing like cannon fire between cliff walls. Rain sheeted down the stone face, turning tan rock slick and black. The sandstone hissed under the sudden baptism, and from above, it flowed. The runoff hit the carved catchment basin high on the cliff wall and gathered, swirling like quicksilver. The groove they had cleared only days before came alive, a shining vein pulsing with water. The team stood frozen, mouths open, as the channel filled, then ran, steady, controlled, curving along its path exactly as its makers intended. "It's working," Miguel whispered, voice reverent. The stream slipped beneath the capstone they had lifted yesterday, disappearing into the cistern with a soft, deepening gurgle. Eliza knelt beside it, rain plastering her coat to her spine, not caring. She watched the stone reservoir swell, its floor disappearing beneath rising water. Her heartbeat synced to the rhythm of its filling. No leaks, no overflow. Designed for one purpose, executed perfectly. Thunder growled again. Water continued to flow. The system drank greedily, as if awakening. "This isn't a fluke," Sam said, shouting over the storm. "This was tested, repaired, improved. You don't carve something like this once. You maintain it." Eliza nodded slowly, droplets clinging to her eyelashes. Ink had bled, but her notes remained. Channel, basin, gradient, cistern. She added a new word, scrawled so hard the pencil nearly tore the page. System. She turned to her team. "We're not just digging ruins anymore. We're mapping a network." Behind her, the last raindrop fell into the cistern, rippling the surface like a heartbeat. By August, the field crew had become something between evangelists and conspirators. Their notebooks brimmed not only with diagrams but with arguments, evidence transcribed into conviction. The channels weren't random. The cistern wasn't symbolic. The entire cliff settlement was tuned like a wind instrument for water. But outside the alcove, the world still believed in walls over wells. Dr. Eliza Hartman's first formal challenge came in the form of a letter, 10 pages, typed on a rattling Remington, and addressed to Professor Leonard Huxley of Harvard University, a man whose name carried weight in every major archaeological journal. He was among the staunchest defenders of the fortress view of Pueblo cliff architecture. His 1929 paper, Crisis Shelters of the Mesa Peoples, was practically canon. It described the cliff dwellings as hasty relocations of desperate populations under duress. A neat narrative, a tragic one. Eliza read it again now, lamp hissing beside her as she sat at the camp table late into the night. Her response was not polite. "You speak of desperation," she typed, pauses filled with the rhythmic clack of metal keys. "But desperation does not produce resource redundancy. You speak of secrecy, yet these systems were crowned on the open face of a cliff. If this is a fortress, it is one where the gates were built to welcome rain, not repel men." She sent sketches, measurements, photographs Miguel had developed in the portable darkroom. She even included an etching Sam had made, one of the carved upper basins, sunlight glinting off its rim like a chalice. Weeks passed with no reply. Her next challenge came live across a podium. September 3, 1937, Denver Museum of Natural History, a symposium on southwestern archaeology. Oak-paneled walls, stiff collars, rows of men who leaned back in their seats like they already knew what she'd say. Eliza stepped up to the lectern in a navy suit still dusted at the hem from Mesa Verde dirt. She clicked the lantern slide projector. The first image flashed onto the screen, an aerial shot of the cliff alcove. Murmurs of approval. Expected. Second slide. The carved channel, water flowing after the rainstorm. The murmurs went silent. She spoke with no preamble.
For decades, we've repeated the same phrase, defensive refuge. Yet the evidence carved in stone suggests otherwise. Not battlements, irrigation, not fortification, filtration. Across the aisle, Dr. Huxley leaned forward, brow knit. Someone coughed. Someone else whispered, "Impossible," under their breath. Eliza clicked again. The cistern, full to the brim. This required planning, skilled labor, coordination, and maintenance. You don't design a system like this if you intend to abandon it. You build this when you believe you'll stay. A hand shot up. Dr. Thompson of Yale. He said, voice nasal, and perhaps it was a temporary installation to ensure survivability under siege. A ripple of agreement moved through the audience like wind in grass. Elisa didn't flinch. Then where are the projectile points? Where are the defensive ramparts? Why leave your water supply exposed on the cliff face? Why decorated with ochre? She clicked the final slide. A close-up of the basin, and along its rim, faint handprints in faded red. Soft, human. The room hushed. You can call it retreat if you prefer the sound of tragedy, she said. I call it residence. Somewhere in the crowd, someone laughed, not mockingly, but with the startled joy of recognition, a sound like a lock clicking open. Sam clapped once loud. Others followed. Not all, but enough. Later in the hallway, Dr. Huxley approached. Thick spectacles, tweed coat, a man carved from old academia. He did not smile, but he said quietly, "Your rain photographs. May I have copies?" She handed him a stack without a word. He nodded and added something she did not expect. "I think," he murmured, "you may very well be right." Back at camp that night, she sat beside the cistern with Sam and Miguel. The stars spilled like crushed quartz across the sky. Coyotes yipped somewhere far below. Miguel broke the silence. "Think they'll rewrite the textbooks?" Eliza looked toward the channel, now dry, but still glistening in moonlight, as if remembering water. "Oh, they won't," she said softly. "The stone already has."
Autumn brought cooler air and new eyes. Word of the Mesa Verde discovery spread faster than Eliza anticipated. Graduate students arrived with notebooks. Rangers came with lanterns. Even tourists, though politely held back from the active trench, leaned over the ropes as if squinting hard enough might let them see water ghosts in the grooves. But the biggest change came not in the alcove, but beyond it. Miguel was the one who first suggested it. He'd been watching the sun dip across the sandstone as he traced survey maps, pencil tapping rhythmically. "What if," he said slowly, "this isn't the only one?" Sam glanced over. "You mean more cisterns?" Miguel shook his head. "More systems." It sent a thrill through the group. So they went scouting, not to excavate, just to observe. Binoculars slung over shoulders, cameras loaded, compass points aligned. They followed the cliff line like detectives walking a crime scene, only the culprit here was assumed knowledge. At one alcove a mile east, they found it again, faint but unmistakable, a rain catchment carved into the rock face, now choked with lichen. No excavation, just observation. The groove ran like a faded scar down the ledge, vanishing beneath rubble. Farther south, another. This one had collapsed walls, but intact channels, wider, with dual inlets, perhaps to accommodate heavier rainfall. At dusk, they sat on the ledge and scraped dust from the channels with twigs. Beneath centuries of grit, the stone was still slick, like skin remembering water. By the sixth find, Miguel coined a phrase for it. "Not fortresses," he said, panting as he climbed a switchback trail. "Water temples." Eliza laughed, not because it was wrong, but because it was dangerously close to being right. Back at base, she pinned a map to the canvas wall of the tent. Red thumbtacks marked every confirmed channel. The pattern was unmistakable. "This isn't random," she said,
tracing invisible lines between the dots. These settlements weren't isolated, they were synchronized. Sam squinted. You think they shared knowledge? Not just shared, she replied. Standardized. That word dropped like a stone in a well. Standardization meant trade, communication, apprenticeship. It meant rituals observed and techniques preserved. It meant culture, not chaos. She wrote in her journal that night, "Perhaps we have misread scarcity as fear. Perhaps we have misread height as retreat. Perhaps they lived high, not to hide, but to harvest." Later, as the fire crackled low, Sam added his own theory. You ever seen how soldiers clean rifles in silence? Everyone knows the motions. No talking, just muscle memory. That's what I imagine. Not warriors, citizens. Maintaining channels before monsoon season. No speeches, just duty. Eliza nodded, staring at the glowing coals. Water is discipline. Miguel stirred the pot of beans. Water is law. Sam smirked. Water is life. They all went quiet, staring at the map as wind rattled the tent walls. Outside, under the moonlight, the carved tannels of the cliff dwellings lay dormant, dry, silent. But now to those who had seen them flood, they did not look like scars. They looked like signatures. Winter crept into the canyon without mercy. Frost collected along the ledges like ghost breath. The carved channels, once gleaming with storm water, now held only sighs of ice. The excavation ended with snow underfoot, but the work did not end with it. Eliza sent her final report to the Bureau in a leather-bound folio, 73 pages of measurements, photographs, rainfall calculations, and hand-drawn schematics. She signed it not with a title, but a statement. These were not fortresses. These were reservoirs of life. Somewhere in a government drawer, that report would gather dust, but in the canyons, dust had always been sacred. Years passed. The world moved on to wars and highways and televisions glowing blue in living rooms far from stone and silence. But every so often, a ranger leading a tour through Mesa Verde would pause beside a shallow groove in the rock and say, "You see that? Most folks think it's erosion, but if you follow it and you keep following it, it leads somewhere." And someone would follow. Not with shovels, not with flags, just with attention. A child crouching low, tracing the groove with their fingers as if reading a sentence. A school teacher squinting at the basin above, imagining rain. A hydrologist standing in stunned silence, whispering, "My God, they built catchments." The story spread again, not as lecture hall argument, but as canyon wind rumor. Not fortress, not refuge. Design, stewardship, intention. Sometimes when the monsoon clouds gathered over the mesas and drum thunder rolled between cliffs, the wind would carry the smell of wet sandstone. And somewhere in the alcove, if you listened closely enough, you could hear the first raindrops strike the ancient basin with a sound like a bell struck in stone. Plink. Then another. Plink. Then the channel would darken. Then the cistern would drink. Then the silence would break into song. A song composed centuries ago by hands long gone, but still directing the chorus of water with gradients so perfect that gravity itself seemed to bow in respect. We call them ancestral Puebloans now. Not warriors in retreat, not ghosts in a cliff, but engineers, hydrologists, residents of the sky-walled cities who taught stone how to remember rain. And though their names are lost to time, their signatures remain, not carved in letters, carved in channels, waiting for storms, waiting for eyes, waiting for us to understand that defense can be loud, but sustainability is quiet.